In the annals of international trade, 2025 will be remembered for a pivotal moment: Canada's decisive victory in its trade war with the United States. This triumph, secured through shrewd strategizing and unwavering resolve, has reshaped the dynamics of North American trade relations. It serves as a testament to the power of strategic retaliation and the enduring strength of the Canadian economy. This victory was not merely a matter of economic gain, it was a statement of national resilience. It demonstrated Canada's unwillingness to bow to pressure tactics and its commitment to protecting its interests on the global stage. The outcome has left an indelible mark on the political and economic landscape of both nations. The trade war, a simmering conflict that had been brewing for years, reached a boiling point in March 2025. A series of events unfolded rapidly, culminating in a decisive victory for Canada. This essay will delve into the key events of this period, examining the strategic decisions that led to Canada's triumph and exploring the far-reaching implications for both countries and the future of North American trade. The trade war between Canada and the United States was not an isolated event but rather the culmination of years of escalating tensions. These tensions had been simmering beneath the surface, fueled by a series of economic disagreements and political maneuvers that had gradually eroded the trust between the two nations. At the heart of this conflict lay a complex web of economic interests, political posturing, and ideological differences. The United States, with its vast economic power, sought to assert its dominance, while Canada aimed to protect its own economic sovereignty and maintain a fair trading relationship. The two nations, bound by geography and a long history of economic interdependence, found themselves increasingly at odds over trade policies, tariffs, and the very nature of their bilateral relationship. The once seamless flow of goods and services across the border became a battleground for competing national interests. The Trump administration, with its America First agenda, had long viewed Canada as a competitor rather than a partner. This shift in perspective marked a significant departure from the cooperative stance that had characterized U.S.-Canada relations for decades. The imposition of tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in 2018 was an early salvo in this trade war, followed by a series of tit-for-tat measures that strained relations between the two countries. These tariffs were justified by the U.S. on grounds of national security, a claim that Canada vehemently disputed. Canada, for its part, refused to be bullied, and responded with retaliatory tariffs of its own, targeting key American exports. These measures were carefully chosen to maximize political pressure on the U.S. administration by hitting industries in key electoral states. The trade war had a significant impact on both economies, disrupting supply chains, increasing costs for businesses and consumers, and creating uncertainty in the markets. The ripple effects were felt far and wide, affecting industries from agriculture to technology. The automotive industry, a key sector for both countries, was particularly hard hit. With tariffs driving up the cost of raw materials and components, manufacturers faced difficult choices about where to cut costs and how to remain competitive in a global market. The dispute also spilled over into the political realm, souring relations between the two governments and straining the historically close ties between the two nations. Politicians on both sides used the trade war as a rallying cry, further entrenching their positions and making compromise increasingly difficult. By early 2025, the trade war had reached a stalemate. Neither side was willing to make concessions, and the economic costs were mounting. Businesses and consumers alike were caught in the crossfire with no clear end in sight. Neither side was willing to back down, and the economic costs were mounting. The prolonged conflict had led to a climate of uncertainty, with investors hesitant to commit to new ventures and businesses struggling to plan for the future. It was against this backdrop of escalating tensions and economic uncertainty that the events of March 2025 unfolded, leading to a dramatic shift in the balance of power. The resolution of the trade war would require not just economic adjustments, but a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between these two neighboring giants. March 2025 began with a sense of foreboding in the financial markets. Investors and analysts alike were on edge, anticipating the next move in the ongoing trade tensions that had been brewing for years. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, and the stakes were higher than ever. The trade war between the United States and Canada, simmering for years, showed no signs of abating. What had started as a series of minor disputes had escalated into a full-blown economic conflict. affecting industries and economies on both sides of the border. The once friendly neighbors were now locked in a battle of tariffs and trade barriers. On the contrary, President Trump, known for his unpredictable and often aggressive negotiating tactics, seemed intent on escalating the conflict. His approach was characterized by bold moves and high-stakes gambles, often leaving both allies and adversaries guessing. This time it appeared he was ready to take things to a new level. On March 11, 2025, the world watched as President Trump, flanked by his advisors, took to the podium in the White House press briefing room. The anticipation was palpable, with journalists and analysts eager to hear what the president had to say. The room was filled with a tense silence as he began to speak. In a move that sent shockwaves through global markets, he announced his intention to double the existing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, raising them to a staggering 50%. This announcement was not just a policy change, it was a declaration of economic warfare. The implications were immediate and far-reaching. This aggressive move, he argued, was necessary to protect American jobs and counter what he perceived as unfair trade practices by Canada. He painted a picture of a beleaguered American industry struggling to compete against what he described as a flood of cheap, subsidized Canadian imports. His message was clear: America would no longer be taken advantage of. The reaction was swift and severe. Markets around the world reacted almost instantaneously, with traders scrambling to adjust their positions. The uncertainty and fear that had been building for months finally erupted, sending shockwaves through the financial system. Financial markets, already jittery due to the ongoing trade war, plunged into a tailspin. The announcement triggered a massive sell-off, with investors fleeing to safer assets. The volatility was unprecedented, and the losses were staggering. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted over 500 points, while the Canadian dollar tumbled to a 6-month low against its U.S. counterpart. The economic fallout was immediate, with both countries feeling the impact. The ripple effects were felt across the globe as markets everywhere reacted to the news. Business leaders on both sides of the border expressed alarm, warning of dire consequences for industries already struggling under the weight of existing tariffs. The increased tariffs threatened to disrupt supply chains, increase costs, and ultimately hurt consumers. The business community was united in its opposition, calling for a swift resolution to the escalating trade war. Trump's tariff announcement was not merely an economic maneuver, it was a calculated political gamble. He was betting that the economic pain inflicted by the tariffs would force Canada to the negotiating table. It was a high-risk strategy, with potential rewards but also significant dangers. It was a high-stakes bet that Canada, facing intense pressure, would buckle and concede to his demands. The president's advisors were confident that the strategy would work, but there were also voices of caution, warning that the move could backfire and lead to a prolonged economic conflict. However, he had underestimated the resolve of the Canadian government and the strategic acumen of its leaders, particularly Ontario Premier Doug Ford. The Canadian response was swift and resolute, with leaders vowing to stand firm against what they saw as economic bullying. The stage was set for a prolonged and potentially damaging trade war, with no easy resolution in sight. The news of Trump's tariff hike sent shockwaves through Canada, but it was met with defiance rather than despair. Across the nation, Canadians rallied together, determined to show that they would not be easily intimidated by their southern neighbors' aggressive trade policies. Political leaders, while acknowledging the gravity of the situation, emphasized the importance of unity and resilience. They vowed to stand firm and protect Canadian interests, ensuring that the country would not be bullied into submission. Among them, Ontario Premier Doug Ford emerged as a key figure, his leadership and resolve becoming a beacon of hope for many Canadians. His response was a masterclass in strategic retaliation, showcasing his ability to think several steps ahead in this high-stakes game of economic chess. Ford, known for his pragmatic approach and his deep understanding of the interconnectedness of the U.S. and Canadian economies, recognized the need for a bold and decisive countermove. He knew that a direct confrontation, mirroring Trump's tariff hikes, would only escalate the conflict and harm both economies. Instead, he opted for a more strategic approach, targeting a sector where Canada held a distinct advantage: electricity. Within hours of Trump's announcement, Ford took to the airwaves, announcing his intention to impose a 25% surcharge on all electricity exports to the United States. This was a calculated move, aimed at exploiting a key vulnerability in the U.S. energy grid. Several states, particularly in the Northeast, relied heavily on Canadian hydropower, and Ford's surcharge threatened to disrupt this flow, leading to potential blackouts and soaring energy prices. The move was designed to hit the U.S. where it hurt the most, without causing undue harm to Canadian interests. Ford's announcement was not a bluff. It was a carefully calibrated response designed to inflict maximum economic pain while minimizing collateral damage. He knew that any disruption to the U.S. energy grid, particularly in the densely populated Northeast, would generate significant political pressure on the Trump administration. The Northeast's dependency on Canadian electricity was a well-known fact, and Ford's move was a direct challenge to the stability of the region's energy supply. The potential for blackouts and increased energy costs was a real and immediate threat, one that could not be ignored by U.S. policymakers. The specter of darkened cities and frustrated citizens loomed large, adding to the urgency of finding a resolution to the trade dispute. Ford's strategic use of Canada's electricity exports as a bargaining chip was a bold move, one that underscored his willingness to defend his country's interests at all costs. It was a reminder that in the complex world of international trade, leverage can come from the most unexpected places. As the situation unfolded, all eyes were on the Northeast, where the impact of Ford's decision would be felt most acutely. The political pressure on the Trump administration was mounting, and the world watched closely to see how this high-stakes gambit would play out.